Picture this: a candlelit throne room in Madrid, 1690. The air is stale, heavy with incense and the sour smell of sickness. At the far end of the hall, on a carved chair that once held warriors and empire builders, sits a king who can barely hold his own head up. His jaw juts forward at a strange angle. His tongue doesn't seem to fit comfortably in his mouth. Drool gathers at the corner of his lips. His skin is pale, his body thin and soft despite the layers of velvet and gold. Courtiers whisper that he cannot eat without help, cannot walk far without stumbling, and, most dangerous of all in a royal house, cannot father a healthy child. This is Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king of his line. His enemies said he was cursed, others claimed he wasn't quite human. Modern geneticists have a better word: inbred. Charles's parents were uncle and niece, and for generations before that, his family had married cousins to keep the pure royal bloodline locked inside a shrinking circle. When researchers calculated his inbreeding coefficient, the probability that 2 copies of a gene he inherited were identical by descent, it came out around 0.25. That's about what you'd expect from the child of a brother and sister. You won't believe how far back that pattern goes, and how many royal houses played the same dangerous game. But before we start pointing fingers at monstrous kings and queens, let's get something straight. None of these people weren't human. They were absolutely human. That's the problem. Their bodies were doing exactly what human biology does when you squeeze a gene pool too tight. So what actually happens when a dynasty decides that the only acceptable spouse is your cousin, or your sibling, or in some cases your own niece or daughter? To answer that, we need to dip into genetics, just enough to make sense of the horror show. Every human carries 2 copies of most genes, 1 from each parent. Some harmful mutations are recessive, meaning you only see their effects when you inherit the same, faulty version from both parents. In a big mixed population, the odds of that happening are low. Marry your cousin, and the odds go up. Marry your cousin's cousin generation after generation, and you're stacking the deck. Geneticists call the result inbreeding depression, an increased chance of birth defects, infertility, immune problems, and strange combinations of traits that can show up in the body, face, or brain. Royal dynasties weren't running Punnett squares in the palace library. They were following 3 much simpler rules. Keep the land together. Keep the power in the family. Trust your blood more than outsiders. The bill for that thinking eventually came due, in bone, blood, and sometimes in the slow collapse of entire kingdoms. Let's go back to the Habsburgs for a minute, because they are the poster family for this. If you look at portraits of Habsburg rulers from the 1500s onward, you'll notice something odd: the lower jaw. It juts, the chin protrudes, the lips don't quite close. This distinctive profile became so common it got its own nickname, the Habsburg jaw. In 2019, a team of researchers analyzed portraits of 66 Habsburg family members, scoring features like jaw protrusion and lip overlap. Then they compared those scores to detailed family trees to estimate how closely related each subject's parents were. The result? The more inbred a Habsburg was, the more severe the jaw deformity tended to be. Charles II sat at the end of that curve. He wasn't just a guy with an unfortunate chin, he was a man with serious developmental issues. Contemporary reports say he had trouble chewing and speaking, suffered frequent illnesses, and didn't learn to walk until well past toddler age. He died at 38, childless, and with him the Spanish Habsburg line died too. In other words, the dynasty literally inbred itself into extinction. But Europe didn't invent the idea of royal blood as a closed loop. For that, you can go much further back, to the banks of the Nile. Picture Thebes in ancient Egypt. A golden bark glides along the river, carrying a pharaoh in full regalia. Beside him sits his great royal wife, who is also his sister. Brother-sister marriage was a long-standing practice among Egyptian pharaohs, and it only intensified under the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty, the one that ends with Cleopatra. Rulers like Ptolemy II and Arsinoe II married their full siblings. Others took half-sisters or nieces as wives. The point was not romance, it was theology and politics. Pharaohs were seen as semi-divine, children of the gods, and who could be an appropriate partner for a living god except another living god from the same line. Was every Ptolemaic or Egyptian royal visibly deformed? No. Genetic roulette can deal you long stretches of apparently fine before a bad combination pops up. But modern analysis of mummies suggests inbreeding did leave its mark. Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh, was likely the child of a brother-sister union. CT scans and DNA studies have indicated congenital foot problems, a cleft palate, and other health issues that might be linked to inbreeding. Again, this isn't about calling him not human. It's the opposite. This is what happens because the same fragile human genetic rules apply, even if you wear a crown and claim descent from Ray. Now jump forward to the 19th century, to a small, determined woman sitting for yet another formal photograph, Queen Victoria. We're in a different world now. The British Empire is at its height. Steamships, telegraphs, factories, everything screams modern. But when it comes to marriage, the royals are still playing an old game. Victoria marries her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. That's not unusual. Cousin marriages are standard in European courts. What nobody realizes is that Victoria carries a mutation for haemophilia B, a serious blood-clotting disorder. She passes this defective gene to some of her children, who then marry into other royal families, Spain, Germany, Russia. As a result, haemophilia becomes known as the royal disease. The gene itself was probably a spontaneous mutation, not caused by inbreeding. But once it's in the family, those dense webs of cousin marriages turn Europe's royal houses into a distribution network. Now picture a different palace, Tsarskoye Selo, outside St. Petersburg. It's the early 1900s. The Empress Alexandra, Victoria's granddaughter, is kneeling by the bed of her only son, Alexei. He's pale and sweating, racked with pain from internal bleeding after a minor bump or fall. Any bruise can be lethal. Any cut can mean days of agony. The imperial heir is fragile, and the entire Russian Empire knows it. Alexei's haemophilia shapes politics. His parents' desperation for a cure opens the door to mystics like Rasputin, which in turn fuels rumor, scandal, and the erosion of public trust in the monarchy. When the Romanovs fall in 1917, the royal disease has played a small but real part in undermining them. Again, the pattern holds. When royal families shrink their dating pool for generations, any harmful mutation, whether caused by inbreeding or not, has an easier time surfacing again and again. But here's where things get interesting. Not all royal inbreeding produced visible monsters, and not all visible differences came from inbreeding. History is messy. Take the idea that the Spanish Bourbons or British Georges were all degenerate because they married cousins. Many of them were perfectly functional rulers. Flawed, yes, but not drooling caricatures. Meanwhile, some individuals from non-royal, non-inbred backgrounds developed severe genetic conditions just from random mutations. So why do we fixate so much on royal deformities, to the point of using phrases like weren't human, partly because royal bodies were public property? Portraits, coins, court gossip, everything about a monarch's appearance was magnified. A jawline becomes a symbol, a limp becomes a metaphor. In the case of the Habsburgs, artists often exaggerated family features to make lineage visually obvious. Look, this is definitely a Habsburg. You can tell by the chin. That artistic shorthand, combined with real genetic issues, fed the legend. Partly because physical difference is easy to weaponize. If you're a rival court chronicler, nothing makes your patron look better than describing the other guy's king as twisted, cursed, not quite human. Medieval and early modern propaganda is full of that. Enemies are malformed, sex-obsessed, pig-faced, goat-legged. Pick your insult. It's dehumanization as a political tool. And partly because, let's be honest, we're still weirdly obsessed with mixing power and body horror. The idea that the people at the top were secretly falling apart appeals to our sense of karma. They oppressed peasants, started wars, hoarded wealth. Surely there was a physical price for that, right? In the case of inbreeding, there often was. But it wasn't divine punishment, it was statistics. You won't believe how cold the math looks on paper. In one famous study, researchers mapped 16 generations of the Spanish Habsburg family, more than 3,000 individuals, just to calculate inbreeding coefficients. From Philip I in the late 1400s to Charles II in the late 1600s, those numbers climb steadily. Philip's coefficient is about 0.25. Charles hits 0.254. and child as a coefficient of a life. Now imagine trying to run a global empire when your rulers are statistically more likely to be sickly, infertile, or cognitively impaired. After a certain point, it's not just a family problem, it's a structural one. And this wasn't just Europe and Egypt. From the Inca in the Andes to certain Mesoamerican dynasties to more recent royal houses in the Middle East and Asia, the pattern repeats. Elites marrying elites within a narrow circle, often cousins, sometimes closer. The reasons vary: religion, politics, racism, simple snobbery, but the genetic consequences rhyme. So what finally broke the cycle? Oddly enough, a mix of romance, revolution, and science. As the 18th and 19th centuries roll on, old monarchies start falling or weakening. New ideas about nationalism and citizenship make marrying a foreign cousin for dynastic reasons less obviously attractive. At the same time, the aristocracy itself gets shaken up. French Revolution, American Revolution, liberal movements across Europe. Suddenly, marrying a commoner isn't unthinkable. Sometimes it's politically smart. Then genetics arrives. By the early 20th century, after Gregor Mendel's work is rediscovered, scientists start to understand how traits are inherited. Doctors and biologists, some of them from noble backgrounds themselves, realize that generations of cousin marriage might not be a great idea for the family tree. To be clear, consanguineous marriages still happen today, both inside and outside royal circles. In some cultures they're common and socially accepted, but very few modern dynasties are doubling down on uncle-niece or brother-sister matches the way the Habsburgs or the Ptolemies did. The risks are just too obvious now, which brings us back to that harsh title, The Kings Who Weren't Human. If there's one takeaway from all of this, it's that they were very human, sometimes painfully so. Their bones, blood, and brains obeyed the same laws as everyone else's. When they gambled with the gene pool, they didn't get a special royal exemption. They got haemophilia. They got collapsed jaws, they got fragile heirs and failing dynasties. The real lesson isn't haha look at the freakish kings, it's that concentrating power and treating a tiny group of people as fundamentally different, above rules, above consequences, never ends well. Not for them, and not for the people they rule. Today, we don't have many crowned heads left who marry their siblings, but we still build our own small gene pools, social, economic, even algorithmic. We still create bubbles where the same ideas, the same backgrounds, the same biases keep circling around and reinforcing each other. The results may not show up on a jawline, but they show up in other kinds of deformity, political, moral, social. So next time someone shares a meme of Charles II or a Habsburg jaw joke, you'll know the deeper story. It's not just about bizarre portraits and tragic kings, it's about how power, fear, and obsession with pure blood-warped families damaged real human beings, and sometimes helped bring empires down. If this look into the unsettling genetics behind royal history got you thinking a little differently about crowns, bloodlines, and what pure really costs, hit that like button, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe for more dives into the places where history, science, and human folly collide.